Chapter 1. Life, in its purest and deepest essence, is not a straight line running from birth to death, but a perpetual circle of completion and renewal. Existence at the cosmic, cellular, and psychic levels operates under an immutable law. For something new to be born, something old must die. Yet, in the modern age, humanity has learned to fear this ending, to resist dissolution, believing that security resides in the permanence of the known. This resistance is the source of most suffering. To recall this fundamental and sacred law, the universe has encoded its message in a symbol as ancient as civilization itself, the Ouroboros, the serpent that devours itself. This symbol is the master key to understanding and navigating the cycles of inner rebirth. The history of this ancestral knowledge is inseparably linked to mystery and the law of time. The most solid legend places the text's origin in a place where death and eternity met, an ancient Egyptian tomb hidden deep within the Valley of the Kings. It is said that the Ouroboros manuscript was found not in a main burial chamber, but in a small side cavity, sealed with a precision that suggested it was not a treasure for the afterlife, but a revelation for the future. The text was found alongside a gold ring, which was not meant to be worn, but to be contemplated. Engraved on this ring was the primordial symbol in its purest form, a serpent devouring itself, forming a perfect circle. The serpent was not depicted with malice or poison, but with an expression of deep internal concentration, like an act of self-sufficiency. The material of the gold ring, a metal that resists corrosion and change, contrasted with the serpent's act, which is an act of creative self-destruction. This contrast encoded the central teaching. The only way to achieve the incorruptibility of spiritual gold is through the incessant cycle of self-digestion, the death of the old form. What is astonishing about the Ouroboros is its ubiquitous presence, fragments of the same symbol appearing in disparate traditions around the world. Scholars have traced the footprint of this sacred circle across millennia and geographies, demonstrating that this symbol is not a cultural invention, but a universal archetype engraved in the human psyche. In classical alchemy, the Ouroboros appeared in furnaces and texts symbolizing the process of circulatio, the cycle of heating, dissolution, and coagulation necessary to transform the lead of ordinary consciousness into the gold of enlightenment. In Gnosticism, the Ophite sect revered the serpent as a symbol of wisdom and secret knowledge, with the Ouroboros representing the totality of the pleroma, the divine fullness. In the Norse tradition, we find Jörmungandr, the Midgard serpent, so vast that it encircles the entire world, biting its tail. Its act of biting is not just a cosmic bond, but the representation of the eternal cycle of Ragnarok, the death of the gods, and the subsequent rebirth of the world. In Hindu traditions, Anantashesha, the infinite serpent, holds the universes on its body, a reminder that creation arises and withdraws in the eternal cycle of samsara. The reason why this symbol was considered too powerful to reveal openly and was kept in initiatic circles or under mythological veils is that the Ouroboros offers a radical alternative to the linear and dualistic view of life. Revealing the truth of the Ouroboros openly is to grant the individual the ability to be their own alchemist, to transcend the fear of death. Established powers, both religious and political, often thrive by maintaining fear of uncertainty and death. The Ouroboros eliminates that fear by affirming that there is no true ending, only transformation. Knowledge of this cycle is the ultimate freedom, transforming the possessor into a self-contained and self-renewing being. Therefore, the Ouroboros was jealously guarded until collective consciousness was ready to face the truth of its own impermanence. That present moment has arrived. The Ouroboros has been revealed because humanity faces a need for radical transformation. We are not only dealing with external crises, ecological, social, but with a profound internal crisis of identity. Obsolete structures, beliefs, systems, egos can no longer sustain life and are crumbling at a dizzying speed. The old self is no longer functional in the new paradigm. We are on the threshold of a collective initiatory death, and the Ouroboros manuscript is the only guide that can teach us not to resist the dismantling. It reminds us that the only way out is through the circle, assuming the responsibility of devouring the part of ourselves that has already served its purpose. Chapter 2. For the practitioner of the Sacred Ouroboros, the symbol is more than an image. It is a map of ultimate reality. The figure of the serpent biting its tail is the graphic representation of eternity because it encloses the concept of without beginning or end. The point of contact between the head and the tail is the point of totality. At that point, the end of the cycle immediately becomes the beginning of the next, negating the existence of linearity. Life is a circulation, not a progression. The circle is the geometric form of perfection. As a representation of the infinite, the complete, the self-contained, the Ouroboros defines the nature of self-sufficient existence. It requires nothing external for its continuity. It contains within itself everything it needs to perpetuate itself. This translates into the human psyche as the truth of intrinsic self-sufficiency. We do not need something external, an achievement, a partner, a possession, to complete us. Totality is already within the circumference of the self. Our true spiritual work is simply to recognize this inherent wholeness. The symbol's influence on alchemy centers on the phrase, "The one is the all," hen to pan. This maxim, which often accompanies the image of the Ouroboros in Hermetic engravings, means that the substance being transformed is also the substance that performs the transformation. The serpent, by devouring its own tail, is ingesting its own matter. The process of change is internal, self-referential. In alchemical terms, this applies to the raw material that must be dissolved and regenerated in the same vessel. In psychological terms, it means that the solution to the crisis is contained within the crisis itself. The part of us that suffers is the same part that has the potential to heal. The Ouroboros teaches us to look inward and use our own experience as the raw material for transformation. This sacred image represents the eternal cycle of existence. Time, as experienced by deep consciousness, is not an arrow, but a spiral that repeats itself at increasingly higher levels. Every sunrise is the rebirth of the sun. Every year is the repetition of the cycle of seasons. The Ouroboros invites us to abandon the illusion of permanence and embrace the cosmic rhythm of ascent, descent, and return. Suffering intensifies when we try to force the sun to stay at its zenith when it is time for nightfall, or for spring to stay when it is time for winter. Ouroboric wisdom is the tuning into the rhythm. The Ouroboros embodies the central paradox. End and beginning are one. Death and birth are inseparable. The act of biting the tail is an act of self-destruction, but since the serpent regenerates, it is also an act of self-creation. There is no point of finalization without a new beginning immediately following. This destroys the idea that death is annihilation. Death, whether of the body, a job, or a relationship, is only the transition point that frees the energy of the old form so that it can be reabsorbed and reformed into something new. Learning to see death as the beginning is the art of the Ouroboros. Finally, the Ouroboros functions as a map of the psyche, the whole that contains itself. Carl Jung, the great explorer of the unconscious mind, saw in the Ouroboros one of the most important archetypes of the individuation process. It represents the psychic state of totality before consciousness splits into opposites: good, evil, masculine, feminine, conscious, unconscious. The serpent is the symbol of the primitive unconscious, which feeds on itself to evolve. The Ouroboros is the memory of our original unity and the guide for the return to that totality through the integration of everything we have repressed or forgotten about ourselves. Chapter 3. The knowledge of the Ouroboros becomes practical through the understanding of the principle of regeneration. the death that generates life. This principle is the mechanics of the cycle. The most direct manifestation of this law is the biological act of the snake shedding its skin, renewal through letting go of the old. The old skin becomes a restriction, a shell that stops growth. The snake does not cling to its past skin. On the contrary, it must rub against the roughness of the earth to release it, an act that is uncomfortable and vulnerable. Without this act of releasing the obsolete, the animal cannot grow and its life is in danger. The application to the psyche is immediate. The old skin consists of the identities, beliefs, habits, and narratives that no longer serve our growth. The person who resists shedding their skin finds themselves tight in their old identity, unable to move forward, stuck in suffering. The wisdom here is simple. To grow, we must be willing to feel the vulnerability of nakedness as the old skin is released. This principle is observed throughout the cosmos. The death of one form is the birth of another. In physics, the energy of a dying star turns into the elements that form new planets. In the cycle of nature, the manifestation is constant. The seed must die for the plant to be born. As long as the seed remains as an individual, intact entity, it maintains its form but cannot fulfill its life potential. It must dissolve in the darkness of the earth, lose its structure, its identity as a seed, to be transformed into the leafy life of the plant. This dissolution is the initiatory death of matter. The psychological application of this principle is the heart of inner rebirth. Old identities must die for the new self to emerge. Identity is not a fixed entity. It is a collection of beliefs and habits that we build to survive in a particular phase of life. The survivor identity that made us strong in childhood can become the victim identity that limits us in maturity. To transition to a master of my life identity, the old identity must be consciously dismantled. This is a process of psychic autophagy, where consciousness, the serpent's head, devours obsolete patterns, the serpent's tail, to assimilate their energy and give rise to the new form. The main obstacle on this path is human resistance to the cycle, clinging to the known out of fear of the unknown. The ego is defined by what it was. The idea of letting go of a core belief, for example, I am not worthy, is terrifying, even if that belief causes suffering, because it is familiar and predictable. The fear of dissolution is the fear of the uncertainty of the void that follows death. The ego prefers known suffering to the terrifying possibility of rebirth. This resistance manifests as procrastination, distraction, or the compulsive need to cling to toxic relationships, jobs, or habits, simply because they are who we have been. The Ouroboros manuscript reveals that suffering is the direct result of resisting the natural cycle of transformation. Pain is the signal that the old skin is no longer serving its purpose. Life, the Ouroboros River, pushes us toward the point of dissolution and rebirth. When we cling to the riverbank out of fear, we find ourselves torn and exhausted. Suffering is the friction created between our will for permanence and the cosmic law of impermanence. Liberation comes not from stopping the cycle, but from surrendering to it, from embracing the death of what must go, knowing that the void is only the womb that will gestate the next cycle of our own perfection. Auroboric wisdom is the certainty that dissolution is the most compassionate act of existence. Continuing with the revelation of the Ouroboros manuscript, having established its nature as a symbol of totality, eternity, and regeneration, we now delve into its more challenging implications. The integration of duality and the understanding of the cycles operating at all scales of life. The wisdom of the Ouroboros demands that the adept not only accept the death of the old form, but also understand how existence is sustained by the unity of opposites. Chapter 4. The Ouroboros transcends the linear thinking that divides reality into separate categories: good and evil, beginning and end, conscious and unconscious. By forming a circle, the symbol forces the extremes to touch and merge. The Ouroboros is the visual representation of the essential unity of opposites, a fundamental concept for psychic healing and spiritual mastery. The serpent is simultaneously destroyer and creator. Its mouth, which is the tool of destruction by devouring the tail, is also the organ of nourishment, the means by which life is sustained and renewed. It is an act of sacred autophagy. In this act of devouring itself, the serpent does not seek annihilation, but assimilation. It consumes its past form to integrate the released energy, ensuring its continuity. This defies human logic, which perceives destruction as the end. The Ouroboros teaches us that the process of dismantling, the destruction of a limiting belief or a failed relationship, is intrinsically a creative act, as it frees the space and energy necessary for the birth of the new form. In this paradox lies the key to surrender. Only by accepting the role of destroyer of the obsolete can we become the creator of the new. This dual nature reveals how the symbol reconciles contradictions, specifically the conscious and the unconscious, light and shadow. The serpent's body can be seen as the totality of the psychic self, where the head represents consciousness, light, the articulated ego, and the known. The tail, in contrast, represents the unconscious, the shadow, the repressed, the instinctive, and what has been rejected or projected outward. The act of the head biting the tail is not passive. It is the inevitable and necessary encounter of the conscious with its own darkness. The Ouroboros says, "Your illumination is hidden in what you have rejected from yourself." To achieve totality, consciousness must intentionally seek, assimilate, and digest its own shadow, not to destroy it, but to integrate it as part of its strength and wisdom. The psyche cannot be complete if a part of itself remains in the dark. The Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung saw in this symbol the deepest manifestation of the individuation process, the path toward the realization of the authentic self. Jung coined the term conjunctio oppositorum, the union of opposites, as the climax of this process. For Jung, personality develops from a series of divisions. The ego separates from the unconscious, thought separates from feeling, masculine separates from feminine. Neurosis and suffering arise from consciousness's inability to reconcile these pairs. The Ouroboros symbolizes the alchemical goal of the psyche, the sacred marriage between the contraries. In practice, this means the individual must unite their capacity for logical thinking, logos, with their capacity for intuitive feeling, eros, their will to act, masculine, with their need to surrender and receive, feminine. The circle is the crucible where these opposing metals melt into the gold of totality. The Ouroboros manuscript explains that the serpent is a representation of the psychic totality before division. In the original state of unity, the psyche was one. Trauma, education, and the need to survive in the three-dimensional world forced the division. The ego was created by saying, "This is me, and this I am not." Everything labeled as "not me" was thrown into the shadow. The Ouroboros urges a return to unity through integrating what was divided. This is not a return to unconsciousness, but a conscious return. It is a process that requires the practitioner to realize that the qualities they most admire and those they most despise in others are, in fact, projections of their own shadow and potential. By reintegrating these denied parts, the circumference of the psychic Ouroboros is sealed, and the individual ceases to be a fragmented entity to become a self-sufficient and complete being. The act of the serpent devouring itself is the self confronting its own shadow. Confrontation with the shadow is the most feared work of individuation. It means facing the envy, anger, laziness, or impulse for destruction that we have denied exists within us. Our Ouroboros wisdom, however, sees the shadow not as a moral enemy, but as a repository of unused vital energy. Repressed anger, for example, is energy that could be used as determination or passion. The Ouroboros teaches us to digest that shadow energy. When the head bites the tail, it is not fighting it. It is absorbing it, transforming instinctive energy into conscious wisdom. This act of self-digestion of the shadow is what guarantees the soul's constant renewal. Chapter 5. The principle of the Ouroboros, being the law of eternal circulation, manifests itself at all scales of existence. Life is not composed of a single cycle, but of an infinity of cycles within cycles, which the manuscript calls fractals of transformation. A fractal is a geometric pattern that repeats itself identically at different scales. This means that the pattern of death, dissolution, void, and rebirth that we experience in a 5-year life crisis repeats itself in the pattern of a single day or a single breath. Mastery consists of recognizing the phase of the cycle, regardless of the scale, and aligning with it. The Ouroboros offers us a lens to examine the great life cycles: infancy, maturity, old age, death, and rebirth. Infancy and youth are the phase of ascent and acquisition. We absorb information, build the ego, and create the first social identity. It is the phase of new birth. Maturity, around 35 to 60 years old, is the phase of fullness and contribution. It is the zenith, where the individual applies the created form. Old age is the phase of descent and review. External energy withdraws to force introspection. It is the phase of the death of social identity and attachment to the physical body. Resisting this phase by trying to maintain the vitality of youth is the cause of great suffering. Every transition between these major phases demands an initiatory death: the death of childhood upon entering adolescence, the death of the single identity upon starting a family, the death of professional identity upon retirement. Ouroboros wisdom is the capacity to honor and let go of the identity of the previous phase, allowing energy to be released for the form of the next phase. Medium cycles operate on a more granular scale, such as the 7-year phases or decade changes. Ancient traditions, from anthroposophy to Kabbalah, have observed these septennial rhythms. Approximately every 7 years, the physical body renews most of its cells, and analogously, the psyche experiences an identity crisis that requires a micro-rebirth. At 28 years old, a Saturn cycle is completed and the structure of life is reviewed. At 42 years old, the midlife crisis, the return of Uranus, is experienced, which is a forced dissolution of the established way of life to make way for a more authentic version. These medium cycles are the adjustment waves that prevent a person from staying too long in a stagnant identity. Small cycles reflect the natural rhythm of the Earth: seasons, lunar cycles, day and night. These rhythms are the most accessible teachers of the Ouroboros. Winter is the phase of death and void. Nature retracts, rests, and accumulates energy in the darkness for the rebirth of spring. The error of modern consciousness is trying to be productive and expansive all year round. Ouroboros wisdom commands the practitioner to align with the external cycle. In winter, it is time for introspection, letting go, and internal cleansing. In summer, it is time for expansion and manifestation. The lunar cycle, with its waning, letting go, and waxing, creating, offers a bi-weekly guide for managing projects and relationships. The descent phase, afternoon and night, is the time for the dissolution of diurnal consciousness, preparing the field for the morning's rebirth. The Ouroboros becomes more intimate in the microcycles, each breath as death and birth. The breath is the Ouroboros operating in real time. Inhalation is birth, the acquisition of new energy, the affirmation of life, the expansion of form. Exhalation is death, the release of carbon dioxide, the old, the toxic, the surrender of form. The small instant of stillness between the exhalation and the next inhalation is the 0 point, the initiatory death that precedes rebirth. All wisdom is contained in this microcycle. If we resist the exhalation, the letting go, the death, we prevent the inhalation, the receiving, the birth. The constant practice of conscious breathing is the fundamental training for deep trust in the Ouroboros cycle. For the practitioner, the essential question is how to recognize where we are in the cycle. The Ouroboros manuscript provides the key, the emotional state or dominant feeling. Fullness or ascent. You feel flow, energy, things work easily. Manifestation is fast. The dominant feeling is expansion and gratitude. Appropriate action. Create, build, expand, enjoy. Descent or dissolution. You feel friction, excessive effort. Things that used to work now break down. Relationships, projects, health. The dominant feeling is frustration, fatigue, loss of interest. Appropriate action. Withdraw, review, take inventory, let go. Initiatory, death or void. You feel disorientation, loss of meaning, deep internal silence. It is the most uncomfortable phase. The dominant feeling is uncertainty, emptiness, nakedness. Appropriate action. Sustain the silence. Meditate. Do not make major decisions. Do not fill the void. Rebirth. You feel new energy, an unexpected creative impulse, sudden clarity, a new vital interest. The dominant feeling is enthusiasm, hope, vision. Appropriate action. Start the new. Move with the flow. Act in the new direction. The wisdom of working with the cycle rather than against it is the fruit of this fractal understanding. When we are in the descent phase, linear consciousness tells us we must try harder or solve the problem. The Ouroboros says, stop. If it is descent, the force of life is withdrawing energy to force dissolution. The only wise action is surrender and rest. Trying to force ascent during descent is the cause of most physical and emotional exhaustion. By consciously aligning with the fractal of transformation, suffering dissolves into the knowledge that today's death is the promise of tomorrow's rebirth. Peace comes when one knows that they are perfectly where they need to be in the eternal turning of the sacred serpent. The Ouroboros, the serpent that devours itself, is the cosmic law of transformation. Having contemplated this symbol in its eternal dimension and as a map of the unity of opposites, we must now descend from the philosophical plane to the plane of experience and daily practice. The Ouroboros manuscript is not a text to be read, but to be lived. Its wisdom becomes operative by applying it to the management of our own continuous metamorphosis. The path of inner rebirth is the art of consciously dismantling the old form to make way for the new form. It is a path navigated through inescapable phases. Chapter 6. The Ouroboros circle can be divided into 4 main quadrants that repeat in every fractal of life, from the cycle of a relationship to the cycle of a civilization. Understanding these 4 phases of the Ouroboric cycle is the key to mastery, as it allows us to know where we are and, crucially, what is appropriate to do at that moment. Phase 1 is fullness, when life is at its peak, before the inevitable descent. This is the phase of maturity, stability, and successful manifestation. Energy is at its highest point. The form, whether an identity, a career, or a marriage, has reached its maximum potential. You feel flow, satisfaction, and certainty. The wisdom of this phase resides in conscious enjoyment and gratitude. The biggest mistake is complacency, believing that this state is fixed and permanent. The Ouroboros teaches us that the zenith inevitably contains the seed of its own decay. It is the moment when, paradoxically, the initiate must begin to observe which parts of this perfect form are already ready to be devoured, mentally preparing for the turning of the cycle. In this phase, the work is not to build more, but to maintain consciousness without attachment. Phase 2 is descent and dissolution, the necessary dismantling process. This phase begins when life starts to feel heavy, friction increases, and efforts no longer yield the same fruit. The structures that previously sustained life begin to break down. Conflicts arise, health declines, or work becomes unsatisfactory. Energy withdraws from the periphery toward the center. This dismantling is not a punishment, but a biological and cosmic function that releases stagnant energy. The wisdom of this phase resides in active review and detachment. The emotional challenge is frustration and resistance. The Ouroboros demands that instead of trying to repair the breaking form, we identify the obsolete parts and let them go gracefully. The appropriate action here is introspection, cleansing of space, of relationships, and inventory. It is the step of the serpent's head toward its own tail. Phase 3 is initiatory, death, the 0 point where all the old has been released. This is the most feared phase, the dark night of the soul. The old structures have completely collapsed. The previous identity no longer exists, but the new form has not yet emerged. There is a deep void, disorientation, and loss of meaning. The Ouroboros at this point is an empty circle that precedes regeneration. The wisdom of this phase is total surrender and silence. The challenge is existential fear of nothingness. The temptation is flight, prematurely filling the void with new addictions, rebound relationships, or distractions. The initiate must learn to sustain the void without filling the space, trusting that this dissolution is the gestational womb of rebirth. This phase is the crucible where true alchemy takes place. Phase 4 is rebirth and ascent, emergence of the new form. After the 0 point of death, life pulses again. A new energy emerges, unexpected clarity, and a new identity that is more authentic and aligned. Synchronicities increase, and the necessary resources or people appear with ease. The new self, like the plant emerging from the decomposed seed, is vulnerable but potent. The wisdom of this phase resides in inspired action and the protection of the new. The challenge is impatience or fear of manifestation. It is the moment to consciously build on the new foundations, to nurture the newborn form with rituals and celebration. This phase leads us back to fullness, but on a higher level of the spiral of existence. The Ouroboros manuscript emphasizes how each phase has its own wisdom and challenges. Fullness demands gratitude without attachment. Descent demands the action of letting go without resistance. Death demands stillness without fear. And rebirth demands aligned action without impulsivity. Suffering is generated by the temptation to try to skip phases or get stuck in one. The addict, or the change-diverse attempts to skip phase 2 and 3 by immediately returning to a false phase 4. Addiction, distraction. The melancholic gets stuck in phase 2 or 3, constantly reliving the dissolution and the void, unable to allow themselves rebirth. Ouroboros mastery is the capacity to allow each phase to unfold in its perfect time without judgment. Chapter 7. Phase 2, Descent and Dissolution, demands a central skill for regeneration, the art of letting go. This is not a passive act of resignation, but a sacred action of preparing the ground for the new. Before the new form can emerge from the void, the old form must be consciously identified, honored, and released. The first step is to identify what must die: obsolete identities, limiting beliefs, and toxic relationships. Consciousness must become a ruthless yet compassionate surgeon. What identity no longer serves me? That of the eternal student who never applies their knowledge? That of the tireless worker who ignores their body? What limiting beliefs are based on past trauma, such as money is scarce or I am unworthy of love? What relationships are based on fear and attachment, consuming my energy without fostering my growth? The manuscript insists that one cannot enter the fullness of the new cycle carrying the emotional corpses of the previous cycle. To make this process concrete, the Ouroboros proposes the ritual of the internal inventory, making a list of what is being carried. This inventory must be exhaustive and written by hand. It is divided into 3 columns. 1. The form that dies, e.g., my victim identity. 2. The associated belief, bad things always happen to me. 3. The energy I want to release and reuse, e.g., the energy of victimization transforms into strength and self-defense. The act of writing pulls the pattern out of the unconscious and places it on the conscious plane, preparing it for the serpent's digestion. This is the first act of conscious autophagy. Then come the liberation practices: writing and burning, symbolic burial, farewell ceremonies. These practices externalize the act of letting go, giving the unconscious proof that the cycle has ended. Writing and burning. Write detailed letters to the people or situations that need to be released, without sending them, describing all the pain and attachment. Then, burn the letter, watching the smoke dissolve. Fire is the alchemical agent that transforms the dead form into pure energy. Symbolic burial. Find a small object that symbolizes the belief or identity to be released, a piece of jewelry, a note, a photo, and bury it in the earth. This act of surrendering the form to the earth facilitates decomposition and the promise of regeneration. Farewell ceremonies. Perform a small ritual of gratitude for the relationship or job that is ending. Honor the purpose it fulfilled, even if painful, before releasing it. Throughout this process, necessary grieving is unavoidable. Honoring what was before letting it go. The Ouroboros is not a symbol of coldness. On the contrary, it demands that the ending be acknowledged with the dignity it deserves. Grieving is the process by which the emotional energy that was tied to the old form is detached. Trying to skip grieving is carrying the energy of attachment into the new cycle. Sadness, anger, or melancholy for what is lost must be allowed. Honoring the past means recognizing its contribution without insisting on its permanence. Here, the crucial distinction is made between healthy surrender and defeated resignation. Defeated resignation is an act of the ego that surrenders out of exhaustion, feeling like a victim of external circumstances, which generates low frequency and attracts more of the same. Healthy surrender is an act of sovereign will that aligns with the law of the Ouroboros. It is saying, I recognize that this form has fulfilled its purpose, and I actively release it so that a higher form can emerge. Healthy surrender is powerful because it is an act of faith in the intelligence of the cycle. The goal of this entire art of letting go is creating empty space, the womb where the new can gestate. Nature only abhors a vacuum if it is unintentional. The void created by the act of letting go is a sacred void, a state of pure potential. The released energy concentrates in this womb, awaiting the spark of consciousness to take on the new form. Chapter 8. Phase 3, the briefest yet most intense, is traversing the initiatory death, the very heart of the Ouroboros. This phase cannot be practiced, it can only be sustained. Initiatory death is the collapse of old identity structures. It is not a physical death, but the death of the ego and the conditioned personality. It is the moment when all the answers of the old identity fail. The individual asks themselves, who am I if I am not my job? Who am I if I am not this relationship? Who am I if I am not my political beliefs? When there is no answer, the identity that had been built dissolves. Shamanic and mystical traditions worldwide demand this symbolic death before the initiate can ascend to a new level of consciousness. It is the passage from lead to gold. The symptoms of being in the death phase are unmistakable: disorientation, loss of meaning, and emptiness. Life feels insipid. Old passions no longer motivate, and new ones have not yet appeared. There is a sense of existential fog. The body may experience extreme fatigue. It is a non-pathological depression, a necessary sadness that honors the ending and prepares the system for total cleansing. This state is the dark night of the soul, where the connection to the divine seems lost so that it can be rediscovered without the crutches of old doctrines. The manuscript explains why this phase is necessary and must not be avoided or rushed. The total collapse ensures that the new form is not merely a small modification of the old one. The universe is dismantling the entire structure so that the foundations are stronger. Trying to rush this phase is trying to abort the rebirth. The duration of the void is proportional to the depth of the change being gestated. The gestation time must be honored. The main threat of this phase is the temptation to prematurely fill the void with new distractions. It is the impulse to seek a new relationship, a new addiction, or a new dogma that provides a quick external identity. If this is done, the Ouroboros cannot turn. The new self is simply the old self in a new disguise. Consciousness returns to phase 2, and the cycle is not completed. The void must be sustained so that the answer of the new identity arises from within and is not imposed from without. Therefore, the practices for sustaining the void are passive and receptive: meditation, silence, and withdrawal. Meditation, not to seek enlightenment, but to sit with the discomfort of nothingness. The practitioner must be the silent watcher of the void. Silence. Reduce the input of external information. Disconnect from networks, television, and mental noise. Silence is the environment that allows the new form to speak for the first time. Withdrawal. Seek temporary isolation to avoid contamination from the expectations of others. Initiatory death must be a solitary process. The final key to surviving the dark night is to trust that from the apparent chaos, new order will emerge. The Ouroboros is proof that chaos is not the end, but the most creative phase of existence. The serpent knows that by devouring itself, it is creating. The practitioner must remember that they are participating in a cosmic process that is guaranteed to produce a more integrated, stronger, and wiser version of themselves. Faith in the cycle is the only light in the darkness of the void. We have traversed the darkness of the initiatory death, the 0 point of dissolution. The adept of the Ouroboros has achieved surrender, releasing the old forms without falling into the temptation to prematurely fill the void. Now the manuscript reveals the dawn of the cycle, the emergence of the new self, and the application of this wisdom to the art of living. Chapter 9. Phase 4 of the Ouroboric cycle is the moment of rebirth. The Ouroboros turns and consciousness emerges from the darkness of the unconscious with a new form. This process is rarely dramatic. It is more often a subtle, yet unmistakable emergence of life. The signs that rebirth is beginning are the liberation of the energy that was previously bound to the void, new energy, clarity, and direction. Suddenly, chronic fatigue and the feeling of existential fog dissolve. The body feels light, energized, and ready for action. A clarity emerges that is not analytical, but intuitive. The individual simply knows what the next step is, the new life direction, the new relationship, or the new project to undertake. This knowing does not come from effort. It is the gift that arises from having sustained the void. Old questions feel obsolete, and new answers present themselves with ease and coherence. The new form has been born. However, the parchment warns about the vulnerability of the newborn, protecting the new while it strengthens. A young plant is tender, a new idea is fragile. The energy of rebirth must be guarded from external criticism, the skepticism of others who remember the old identity, and, more dangerously, from internal self-criticism, the voice of the old identity that tries to judge the new form as naive or impractical. The initiate must act as a protective parent to their new creation, surrounding it with nourishing environments and limiting exposure to people or situations that might sow doubt. It is a time of conscious but cautious action. The nourishing practices in this phase are rituals that honor and celebrate the new. The start of the new cycle must be marked so that the unconscious receives the signal that the death has ended. Ritual of the name. If the rebirth involves a new identity or role, write a manifesto of this new identity. Ritual of the space. Acquire a new object, a ring, a journal, a tool, that symbolizes the new form, consecrating it with the new life intention. Ritual of celebration. Share the rebirth with 1 or 2 trusted witnesses, not to seek validation, but to anchor the new reality in the external world. Once the turn is completed, the initiate's central practice is the visualization of the complete Ouroboros, seeing the entire cycle as sacred. The person must integrate the understanding that Phase 3, death, was not a mistake or a punishment, but the greatest gift that made Phase 4, rebirth, possible. By visualizing the entire circle, the practitioner honors the darkness as much as the light, understanding that without self-digestion, there would be no self-regeneration. This dissolves future fear of descent. The final integration is to incorporate the lessons of the cycle into the new form. The new identity is not naive. It carries the wisdom of initiatory death with it. The lessons learned about detachment, surrender, and the power of the void become the new foundations of life. The reborn person has a depth that can only be born from having traversed the dark night. The cycle is sealed with gratitude for the transformation, the ritual of completeness. This ritual is simple: to prostrate or sit in deep stillness and offer gratitude to the Ouroboros, to the process, to the old form that died bravely, and to the new form that has emerged. This gratitude anchors the high frequency of fullness and prepares the field so that, when the new cycle inevitably begins its descent, it is accepted with the same peace. Chapter 10. The wisdom of the Ouroboros is not just a theory of the psyche, it is a navigation system for life. By recognizing the fractals of transformation, we can apply the cycle to any area of existence, eliminating resistance and facilitating flow. In life transitions, changing careers, ending relationships, moving, the Ouroboros provides the structure. When facing a career change, Phase 2, descent, is the moment of dissatisfaction with the current job and the need to release the old professional identity. Phase 3, death, is the period of unemployment or retraining, the feared void between jobs. The wisdom is not to rush the void, but to use it for deep introspection on true purpose, allowing Phase 4, the new aligned role, to emerge from authenticity, not from financial necessity. In the end of a relationship, the Ouroboros teaches us not to see the end as failure, but as the necessary death of a dynamic to liberate the individuals for their next rebirth. In trauma healing, the Ouroboros is essential, allowing the traumatized identity to die to be born healed. The identity forged by trauma is an old skin that served to survive, but now limits growth. Healing demands an act of consciously devouring that identity. Phase 2 is the act of revisiting and dismantling the trauma narrative. Phase 3 is the moment of releasing identification with the victim. The Ouroboric healer accompanies the client through the void, not to fill the gap of the trauma, but so that the identity of the integrated person, Phase 4, can be born from truth and resilience. In creativity, the Ouroboric cycle manifests constantly. The cycle of inspiration, execution, completeness, and new beginning. Phase 1 is the initial inspiration. Phase 2 is writer's block, or the moment when the piece is not working, the dissolution of the initial form. Phase 3 is the artist tearing up the canvas or deleting the draft, entering the void of not knowing. Only from this void can the masterpiece emerge, Phase 4. The wisdom is not to despair at the block, the dissolution, but to honor it as a necessary part of the creative process. In spiritual practice, small daily deaths are required that prepare for awakening. Awakening is not a single event, but a continuous series of ego deaths. Each meditation is an Ouroboric microcycle. One enters the silence, death. One releases thought, dissolution, and one emerges with greater awareness and presence, rebirth. The constant practice of the Ouroboros is the surest way to advance towards enlightenment, as it accustoms consciousness to letting go. In relationships, mastery consists of allowing old dynamics to die so that new ones may emerge. Couples often get stuck in a repetitive cycle. For the relationship to grow, the dysfunctional dynamic, e.g., that of the pursuer, distancer, must be identified and consciously put to death. Phase 2. Phase 3 is the discomfort of uncertainty before the new dynamic, Phase 4, of mutual respect and equity, can be born. The Ouroboros teaches that the dissolution of the unhealthy dynamic is an act of love toward the relationship and individual growth. In the aging process, each stage requires letting go of the previous one. Old age is, in itself, a long Phase 2 culminating in initiatory death, physical death. Peace in aging comes from the grace to let go of physical strength, youthful beauty, or professional identity, and to embrace the wisdom, introspection, and peace offered by the final phase. Chapter 11. The Ouroboros manuscript concludes with the call to mastery of the cycle, to stop being passive subjects of change and become conscious facilitators of one's own transformation. This mastery is the wisdom of knowing when to sustain and when to let go. It is the ability to feel whether a pain is a simple growth pain, requires sustaining and pushing, or if it is a dissolution pain, requires letting go and surrendering. This discrimination is the highest form of practical intuition. It involves developing a deep trust in the process of transformation. The initiate trusts that the law of the Ouroboros is benevolent. There are no mistakes, only cycles. Every fall is a necessary immersion into the darkness that precedes the next ascent. This faith dissolves anxiety about the future. Mastery allows one to see every ending as the seed of a new beginning. Failure does not exist. There is only the end of a form that provides the raw material and energy for the next form. Every crisis becomes an opportunity for ascent. This awareness brings the peace that comes from accepting impermanence. The struggle for permanence is the struggle against cosmic law. Peace is found in the immovable center of the turning serpent, accepting that everything is a process of constant flow. The ultimate goal is to become the conscious facilitator of one's own transformation, the head of the serpent that knows when to bite its own tail with intention and purpose. The human being ceases to be a fixed entity to become a dynamic process of self-creation. The final promise of the Ouroboros manuscript is immortality through continuous transformation. The Ouroboros is the symbol of eternity. By aligning with its cycle, the human being is freed from the tyranny of linear death, understanding that the self is not the form that dies, but the consciousness that eternally renews and is reborn. The human being becomes a living Ouroboros. Chapter 12. We have reached the end of the journey dictated by the Ouroboros manuscript. We have unveiled the truth that lies at the heart of transformation. Existence is not a straight line, but a sacred circle of death and rebirth. The Ouroboros is not just a symbol. It is a mirror reflecting the fundamental law of the universe, a law that operates in the infinite cosmos and in the microcycle of our breath. The ancient wisdom, closely guarded in the golden ring, has been handed over to us. To achieve wholeness, we must be willing to devour, digest, and release everything that has already fulfilled its purpose. Human suffering, we have understood, does not lie in change itself, but in the desperate resistance to Phase 2, dissolution, and Phase 3, initiatory death. We fear the void, the loss of meaning, the disorientation that accompanies the collapse of the obsolete identity. However, the Ouroboros assures us that darkness is not the end, but the womb. The void that opens after surrender is a space of pure potential, the alchemical crucible where consciousness melts and reforms into a wiser, more integrated, and more resilient version. He who dares to sustain the silence of the dark night without rushing to fill the gap with distractions guarantees the purity of the rebirth. Mastery of the Ouroboros does not demand a life of unshakable perfection. It demands a life of conscious fluidity. It is the art of knowing with intuitive certainty when the time has come for the serpent's head to bite its tail, when a belief must be released, when a dynamic must be dissolved, and when an identity must be surrendered to the earth. By integrating the shadow, by fusing the conscious and the unconscious, the adept becomes the one who is the all, hen to pan. Life ceases to be a struggle against the current and transforms into an elegant dance with the cycles of existence. The reward of this discipline is profound. It is not physical immortality, but psychic immortality, the liberation from the fear of annihilation. By fully living the cycle of transformation, fullness, dissolution, death, and rebirth, the human being aligns with the eternal rhythm. Every ending becomes a seed, every crisis an opportunity for ascent. The Ouroboros is ultimately a symbol of radical hope, reminding us that we are not the form that perishes, but the eternal consciousness that ceaselessly renews itself. May the wisdom of the golden ring guide us to graciously accept the winters of our soul, knowing that in the heart of dissolution, the unbreakable promise of spring already beats.